There we go. And thanks to all of you. It's so nice to see you all on this unusual time for the special meeting of the PAC. So welcome everyone to the July 28th, 2022 Park Advisory Committee meeting for the East Bay Regional Park District. It's 10:08 a.m. Madam Secretary, could you please call the roll?
Absolutely, Chair Tsutsui. Member Arce. Member Arce not present. Member Burke. Member Burke not present. Member Carey.
Here.
Hello, Member Carey. Member Chang.
Here.
Hello, Member Chang. Member Claxton.
Here.
Welcome, Member Corkin.
Here.
Welcome, Member Corkin. Member Deschambeau.
Present.
Hello, welcome. Member Dieter. Member Dieter not present. Member Espana.
I meant, sorry, I had my volume turned off. I'm here.
Hello, welcome, Member Dieter. Thank you. Member Espana.
Present.
Hello, Member Lacey. No, Member Lacey. Member Mahadevan.
Here, present.
Welcome, Member Mahadevan. Member Nason.
Present.
Hello, welcome, Member Rickard.
Here.
Welcome, Member Robinson. Member Robinson not present. Member San Juan.
Here.
Welcome, Member Simmons. Not present. Member Skaradoff.
Here.
Welcome, Member Williams. Not present. Member Obringer. Not present. Chair Tsutsui.
Here.
Welcome. Additionally, we also have a number of Park District staff joining, including Assistant General Manager of Acquisition, Stewardship and Development, Christina Kelchner, CFO and Assistant General Manager of Management Services, Deborah Ocker. Welcome. Chief of Maintenance and Skilled Trades, Robert Kennedy, Chief of Government and Legislative Affairs, Eric Feeler. Welcome. Captain David Folps, Captain Wilson Lau, Captain Al Elzy. We also have Legislative and Policy Management Analyst Lisa Baldinger, Management Analyst Claire Gripping. Welcome. Executive Assistant Yuli Padmore, myself, staff from PrimeGov, Alex Gonzalez. Thank you for getting us up and running today. Unless I've missed anyone, I believe that concludes roll call.
Great, thank you. And before we get started, just an announcement that the purpose of conducting the meeting as described in this notice is to provide the safest environment for staff and the public while allowing for public participation. Pursuant to the Brown Act as amended by AB 361, the Board of Directors and staff may participate in the board meetings via phone or video conferencing and/or through a hybrid of in-person and remote attendance. The East Bay Regional Park District or Park District intends to hold meetings through either entirely virtual platform or a hybrid of in-person attendance, with the Board of Directors, designated staff, and limited members of the public to participate in person at the Park District Headquarters, 2950 Peralta Oaks Court, Oakland, California, and through the Park District's virtual platform, Zoom. If the committee decides to hold a hybrid in-person meeting, attendance by members of the public will be subject to the maximum capacity of 5, as well as compliance with current health and safety protocols. This information can be found on the agenda on the district website, ebparks.org. Do any committee members have questions about the meeting procedures? Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed with the agenda. And so our item number 2 is public comments for items not on the agenda. Speakers are asked to limit themselves to 3 minutes. Should you have comments regarding a specific agenda item later in the meeting, there will be time to share public comment at that time. And I believe we have one public comment that came in and was shared with the PAC regarding bicycles in the park. So I think that has been entered into the record. Do we have any other public comments for items not on the agenda at this time? No. Okay, so seeing none, we can proceed on to item number 3, which is the main topic of this meeting. So we'll be hearing about the draft policy for capital project prioritization, and I believe those materials supporting this item have been circulated to you. This will be presented by AGM Christina Kelchner, AGM Deborah Ocker, and Legislative and Policy Management Analyst Lisa Baldinger. And so I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Satsui. And the presentation today is going to be given by Lisa Baldinger. We're very excited about bringing this forward. It's new for the Park District and really an effort to prioritize and have criteria for transparently prioritizing our capital projects. The Park District does over $50 million about of capital projects every year we actually construct. And so it's a large capital project program. And we have many more capital projects, I would say, on the list than we're able to deliver every year. And so to be able to prioritize the capital program in a way that really aligns with the district's mission and vision and the policy of the board of directors, what this is a matrix of criteria that we are presenting to the board of directors for their adoption in August, that then capital projects will be run through that matrix, the criteria, and given a score and prioritized then for future years in accordance with that score. So that's the general overview. We do hope this will provide some stability for staff in terms of work plans that are predictable and knowable, and transparency, of course, for the public to understand why we're prioritizing certain projects over others. If a project does not score as high, it doesn't mean it won't be done. It just means it won't be as prioritized as quickly in time as some projects that score, higher. So with that, I will turn it over to Lisa Baldinger, who's going to walk us through this. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Get up our slide deck. All right, really want to thank both the General Manager, Sabrina Landreth, as well as AGM Kelchner and AGM Ocker for their leadership on this work. And then also want to express appreciation for our colleague, Lisa Gorgian, who wasn't able to join us today, but she has been an absolute asset in this process. So to dive in with a little bit of background, Christina touched on these points, but in terms of prioritizing capital projects, the East Bay Regional Park District is really seeking to create this criteria which can help support a transparent evaluation of Park District capital projects that are in alignment with our mission and vision. This is something that's new to East Bay Regional Park District, but it's not new to the world of government. There's other entities and jurisdictions that we were able to review their criteria that have been in place for a number of years, including the City of Oakland, to serve as guidance as we're evaluating our criteria. And then we were able to make some adjustments based off of our mission and vision to make sure that we're putting projects through a matrix that really aligns with the interests of the Park District that was set forth through our master plan development. So a couple notes on the benefits of a capital project prioritization, having this policy, having this criteria. We're seeking for it to increase transparency and accountability of projects. It's designed to really center equity and community identified needs, and we'll talk about that a little bit throughout the criteria. It is providing guidance on improving funding strategies. So there is a finite amount of funding that we can invest in projects on an annual basis. So by identifying priority projects, we're then able to make those choices really thoughtfully. And then also providing a comprehensive and focused and stable work plan for our staff to provide that project delivery to the East Bay public. So really making it clear where things are in the work plan, how they rank with this policy that the board is guiding, and what that looks like. So before we begin, a foundational element that we just want to make sure we're all on the same page of is what is a capital project. And so maybe the simplest explanation that our colleague of Chief of Design Construction uses is that a capital project has a start and an end point. So it's a project which can develop, improve, or maintain a Park District asset. It can be natural or built infrastructure, visitor use facilities, a large-scale restoration project, utilities, or trails can all meet this. The Park District also has maintenance programs, and maintenance programs are things that are ongoing. And there are things such as pavement and park residents and things that will consistently on an annual basis need upkeep. So an example on your screen, you can see the Albany beach restoration, and that's a great example of a capital project that had a start and an end point, and you can now go out and enjoy the beach, and it's wonderful, and it's always very well used. But going forward, it will need maintenance on an annual basis for the pavement, for the restrooms there. And so the capital project was when it was underway, and maintenance programs go on. But we also wanted to recognize that there are essential projects that have legal, regulatory, or safety mandates that do need to go forward. We saw this in other jurisdictional examples, and we see this in our own work. And so these are projects that need to go forward. And so we will not be proposing to put them through the matrix. We'll be identifying those as essential projects. They will not receive a score, and they will advance at the recommendation of the general manager as resources become available to move them forward. So a capital project is a project that has a start and an end point, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So just a little bit of background of where we got to here and now, and thank you all for taking time out of your morning to prioritize this discussion on behalf of the staff team. We really appreciate it. This all started just back in January of 2022. The general manager directed staff to develop some criteria. A staff team reviewed a number of cross-jurisdictional examples. We then were able to draft up some criteria that we shared back with our colleagues, with the general manager. And we wanted to make sure that there was also some public input in this process. And so we'll talk about the scientific survey on the next slide. But we did do a public survey to get some public feedback. And then again, here today, we'll also be receiving your feedback. In April, we met with our chiefs and our managers and staff at all levels who interact with capital projects to get further input and refine the criteria. We did some test applications of the criteria to really see, what does this look like? Are we missing something? Is there an element of a project that's not captured? Are we too specific in some areas? Can we be objective? So kind of asking all those questions to mold what you all received in your packet for today's discussion. We then fielded the scientific survey in May. In June, we brought the draft before our board of directors at a study session and introduced the criteria. We came back just last week in July and had a deeper conversation with our board on the draft criteria. Here today, we'll be sharing it with you all. And then in August, it's our hope that our board will be able to adopt this criteria as part of a formal policy that can actually be put into use quite rapidly into our budget process starting in September. So as I noted on the last slide, one means of gaining public input that we leveraged for this process was a scientific survey. This survey held questions on the criteria, asking the public to rank their interest. Before we dive into that data, just as a foundational background, the survey was conducted from May 25th to May 31st. It was a sample size of 600 East Bay residents. And it was not limited to registered voters. So it was all residents. And then our survey consultant, EMC Research, then weighted two census demographics to reflect the geographic and demographic communities of the East Bay. And it was, responses were obtained hybrid. So email, text to web, and live telephone interviews, both landlines and cell phones, were means of obtaining input on this survey. So the next 4 slides will kind of group that criteria into thematic buckets. Before we begin, just to make sure we all have a good foundation of how to read the graph before you. On the graph, it's a scale of 1 to 7, 1 being not important to the respondent at all, 7 being extremely important. The responses that are bucketed into a blue color, those are important and strongly important. In red is less important, and then the darker the color is, the stronger the opinion is, with gray representing unsure or no real opinion from the respondent. So also want to thank Chief of Government and Legislative Affairs, Eric Fueller, for his partnership on this survey. This is something that's in the Government Affairs work plan twice a year, and so we are thrilled to be able to pair it with the capital improvement program work. So what you can see before you on this slide is that it continues to be a really strong priority of our public to see mitigation of wildfire resilience. And this is closely followed by protection and restoration of local wildlife. So when we get to the criteria, you'll see we recommended a varying point score for each criteria, and wildlife habitat is up at one of the stronger points recommended. You'll also see that our public continues to prioritizing managing water quality for both swimming and habitat, expanding access and nature-based climate mitigation for adapting to wildfires, sea level rise, and flood protection. This is also reflected in the criteria. And then really doing that climate mitigation with reduction of greenhouse gases through regional trails. So these are fairly consistent themes that we've seen poll high in recent surveys, and it's good to see it continue. In terms of facilities and project criteria, our public really is prioritizing repairing and improving visitor use facilities to extend their useful life. So you can think of some of our aging visitor centers really wanting to make sure that they extend. So Coyote Hills and Environmental Education Center are good examples where we want to make sure we're taking care of those. And then also having facilities that can help support green jobs. So park rangers, public safety officers, and others to expand both the economy as well as the local workforce. And then also a little bit lower out of all of the criteria is leveraging external funding. And this was interesting because from a staff perspective, we are always thinking about leveraging external funding to drive projects forward, but seeing that it is of a lower priority for our public was interesting going into this criteria. And a little bit higher was partnering with community-based organizations on project improvement. So when we get to the criteria, you'll see we put those two together in a partnership criteria. In terms of expanding access, something just to note on a high priority of our board is expanding services and improving access for underserved communities. One of our most deep criteria is equity. We have a number of subsequent definitions that we'll talk through in terms of how the Park District is proposing an equity definition for this criteria. And then also we did ask both about expanding access facilities for sort of multi-generational opportunities and just expanding access in general. This is core to the Park District's mission and vision, and so we were pleased to see it continues to resonate with our public. And then our last of these slides is a question about welcoming parks. And so something that was interesting on this is that for East Bay residents, it's really important that we welcome park visitors from near and far. That, as you can see on this slide deck, was a little bit of a higher priority than just specifically creating parks for East Bay residents. And so really thinking about our regional visitors and our probably statewide visitors, we have over 25 million unique visitations every year. And so hearing this from our public was great to see. And then the last slide on the survey before we dive into the draft criteria that we're all here to discuss today is this is our first time asking this question about, do you trust the East Bay Regional Park Districts to properly manage your tax dollars? Our consultants let us know that 2/3 agree is really something to be proud of. They called it the gold standard for a public agency. And I really want to emphasize that it's our goal with this criteria of bringing more accountability and transparency to our capital project prioritization, that this number will only increase for years to come. And then throughout the slide deck, we've been referencing the number of staff input, but really want to name how many people contributed. So over the last 4 or 5 months, we've been holding a number of meetings. Really want to thank our Park District executive team for their feedback and input. Also just a holistic group of chiefs and managers who engage on capital projects on a regular basis. We also brought up before, we have an internal capital projects meetings where staff of all levels can join the conversation, learn about what projects are moving forward at the Park District. It's a great space for cross-departmental learning. And then also mention that we've been testing this criteria, pressure testing it all throughout the development process, and want to thank our finance team for their support on that. All right, and if we're ready, we're going to be diving into the criteria. There are 10 criteria. A number of them have subsequent definitions. It is quite a bit of information. And so really looking forward to having a conversation at the end, but just want to give that warning before we dive in that we have a good amount of slides still to get through, but want to give you all the information so that way we're all starting from the same place as we dive into conversation. So I did reference that the equity definition is one that we really did have a number of conversations about, thinking about how can we relate this to state programs, federal programs, how can we make sure also though that this definition is capturing the role that regional parks play in the East Bay, that we're capturing how our programs engage our communities at our facilities. And so with all of that in mind, this is our highest recommended point criteria at 20 points. And with all of that in mind, we came up with two means of meeting this goal of equity. And our fantastic GIS team is able to apply this criteria to a map using data on programmings and data on census information. So that way we can really clearly have a matrix of which parks and which projects meet this criteria and which don't. Our goal was to limit the objectivity and really, limit the subjectivity and really make it an objective whether or not the criteria is met. So the first of our equity definitions is geographic equity. And this is if the park or trail where the project will occur is within a half-mile radius of a census tract that meets the Cal EPA definition of disadvantaged communities, the Plan Bay Area 2050 Equity Priority Community definition, and we want to have some flexibility knowing that this is an ongoing conversation if there are additional good definitions that come up, so an additional geographic metric from a regional, state, or national plan. However, we felt that this was a good definition, but it didn't capture everything the Park District is able to do for our communities. And for that reason, we added the layer of social equity. And social equity is our interpretation and recreation teams. They capture data of where their programs are coming from and where they're going. And so, for example, what social equity is if we have data to show that regular programming with participants from underserved communities, as identified in the definitions, are using that facility, using that visitor use facility, using that park area, it then meets the social equity. So an example of social equity would be the Tilden Environmental Education Center. That center is not within a geographic equity zone. However, we do have data showing that programming from areas of disadvantaged communities and Plan Bay Area priority communities do go to that facility and use it regularly. And so just so we all have the same foundational background, wanted to pop on the screen the definitions of a Cal EPA disadvantaged community. This is the definitions that is taking in a disproportional amount of pollution, environmental degradation, and socioeconomic and public health conditions. And this is a map feature that's regularly updated by Cal EPA. So it's not static. We did not want these definitions to be static. So that way at all times, we can continue to use the most updated information and source. And then a definition that was created looking just at the Bay Area region is the Plan Bay Area 2050 Equity Priority Community. Some of you may know it as a community of concern. And this is a definition that has that a high percent of the population meets some of the identified elements on the screen. So a high percent of people of color, low income, level of English proficiency, seniors, zero vehicle households, single parent households, people with disability, and rent burdened households. And just to pop back on the slide, the goal here is to be investing our resources in the communities of greatest needs, the communities that have been historically underserved. The goal of this definition is not necessarily geographic balance. We're not looking to spread it equally across the region. We're looking where can we put our investments to greatest serve our communities that need these investments the most. So that is the goal. So we're not looking for the geographic balance across it, but it's geographic equity. All right, moving on to our criteria number 2, habitat and resource conservation. Noted during the survey data that this is one that our communities continue to have strong interest in seeing us prioritize. It also aligns, it's within our mission. Everything we do has an environmental ethic. And so on habitat, an example project of what sort of meets this criteria, just so we all have the reference point in mind. One that maybe you're all familiar with that's completed is the Dotson Family Marsh in Richmond. It was a large marsh restoration. There's also the Bay Point Access Project in Bay Point that included that marsh element. So these are projects that have a resource element that would meet this criteria and receive these points. And then a project, it's the holistic score of all the different points of all the different criteria that we'll go over at the end of the slide deck. So continuing on, again, very central to the Park District's mission is increasing and enhancing access. So here, some projects that might come to mind are Dunbar and Quarry Campground by the Bay in Fremont, where we expanded access for the community to enjoy bay views and outdoor recreation. Additionally, Roddy Ranch in Antioch, it's underway right now, hopefully soon to open, is an access project creating a new point of access to a regional park for our communities to enjoy. Climate preparedness, and we're really looking at this from both lenses, both climate adaptation and climate mitigation. So for climate preparedness, some projects that might come to mind are our Hayward Marsh project. This is a project that with some restoration similar to Dotson, similar to Bay Point, it'll really enhance that nature-based infrastructure to be resilient to sea level rise and also carbon absorption. And then also the future projects at Alameda Point, these are projects that we're really going to have to think about sea level rise while designing. And so they're projects that we expect will meet this criteria quite swiftly. Next up, I noted on the survey data that it was a little bit lower for our public to leverage external funding, but there was a strong interest in partnering with community-based organizations. And so we put this together under the definition of partnership. I'll just pop to the next slide, which is a partnership is defined as a legal or formal collaboration between the East Bay Regional Park District and an external organization with shared and specific responsibilities. This is an area that we hope to continue to grow into, but some examples that might come to mind, there's maybe the traditional partnership. So our Doolittle project, we're partnering with Caltrans and Bay Trail to move forward. There's also the Ridge Trail, which is a nonprofit that goes across East Bay parks. And that's also a great example of a partnership project that if a Ridge Trail project were to move forward, it would meet this criteria. And then there's also has been a couple conversations with organizations such as the East Bay, East Oakland Collective for projects at Martin Luther King. So some conversations about going into a project together. So we're seeing more and more in grants and other areas that there's interest in seeing some community-based partnerships with government agencies. And so we wanted to make sure to be also prioritizing that within our own criteria. And then for leveraging external funding is one maybe we're all a little bit more familiar with, but this is looking for 30% external funding coming towards a project. And so this could be, for example, the McCosker Creek restoration received a number of state grants. It also received a direct member funding from Assemblymember Bauer Cahan. And so that's a different way to come at this partnership definition. So we're really evening the playing field. So whether it be the external funding or a community-based organization partnership, a project would receive these points. Okay, 6 out of 10, we're almost there. Next up is operating efficiencies. And so this is looking at some time savings, materials or maintenance savings, or resulting in a revenue generating outcome. So we do have our business services team that helps maintain sites, provide for wedding facilities and others that have that revenue generating outcome. But in terms of how we really want to objectively come at this, is we have a work order system. And so if we're seeing a higher than average amount of work orders for a specific project, it might require a larger capital project fix to have that operating efficiency occur. So a great example that I think we're all familiar with here is the Roberts Pool. We're doing that large upgrade, which will help to relieve those maintenance needs. And then also the Anthony Chabot sewer line in Castro Valley is a capital project underway that'll help relieve the ongoing maintenance need for operating efficiencies in the long term. Public and environmental health. At the beginning of this presentation, we discussed what an essential project is, that it's a legal, regulatory, safety mandated project. And public and environmental health is really getting at the elements of a project that are public safety and environmental safety that are not mandated, that don't need to be essential, but really need to be acknowledged and considered. So an example of this is we did the Lake Anza oxygenation. It wasn't an essential project because it didn't have a critical timeline, but it is a project that lends itself to environmental health by improving water quality, making it safer for swimming. Another example is at the Tilden Environmental Education Center, we have a partnership project actually with the Hills Emergency Forum for some wildfire mitigation. And that is an example of one that is having that public safety element to it, would receive these points. For multi-beneficial use, we've talked a little bit about access here and wildlife here, but something that we really want to make sure is that as we're going into our capital projects, we're thinking about the whole picture. It's really not satisfying for a park user if every time that they go to their trail, their local trail that they feel a sense of belonging at, it's under construction. So we want to make sure that when we're going in to do a project, we're taking as many elements into consideration as possible and bringing them together. So for a multi-beneficial use project, a great example is we have a Brooks Road restoration project in Tilden. This is bringing an access bridge component, a restoration component, and it's also serving as mitigation. So it has a number of elements being factored into it beyond just repairing the bridge. It's also repairing the creek and having other elements to it and really thinking holistically. There's also maybe you could think of a staging area and a visitor center where we have access to new trails as well as access to environmental education. So just really bringing together all the different elements of the work would receive this point. Maintains and extends useful life as services. We are in our late 80s as an agency. We have facilities that were built by the WPA, and we have just many things that benefit from a capital project improvement. And so this is going to one of our park sites and providing an investment that creates a longer term success for that project. So an example in Richmond is our Keller Beach project. Keller Beach currently is accessible, it's there. However, we do plan to go back in, create an ADA restroom, improve the beach area and the habitat at that site, ultimately extending the life of that site, factoring in sea level rise components and others. So maintaining and extends the useful life of services is really taking care of what we have. So it's not, we're not going to lose it because we're taking care of it and we're thinking about it. And then lastly is the project readiness criteria. This is the lowest on the point score, but a critical component of a project moving forward. What this means is that the project we're discussing is identified in the Park District's master plan. It's identified in an adopting planning or environmental assessment document, so a land use plan or a land use plan amendment, or it's within one of our voter approved commitment lists. The Park District, we still have 4 active voter approved commitment lists, including our 1980s Measure AA. So we have Measure AA, Measure WW, and Measure FF. I guess Measure CC is closed out. And these commitment lists have project elements in them that we want to acknowledge. So project readiness is identifying that this project has been named in one of these formal documents. So just to put that all together, gave a couple of project examples throughout the criteria, but really what it comes down to is how does a project score holistically across the criteria? So we'll have 3 examples I'm happy to talk through. The first one is the Temescal Recreation Area Improve Water Quality Project. And so thinking through this project, one thing to note is that currently as defined, it does not meet the equity criteria. However, as you can see, that doesn't hold it back per se. It still receives 100 out of 135 points. It does meet habitat and resource conservation goals, public access goals, operating efficiencies, and just the majority of the goals of the capital matrix. Next up is our Tilden Replace the Environmental Education Center project. This is a project that, as we discussed on social equity, it does meet the equity goal by providing regular programming for communities that meet those definitions that we discussed. However, as currently designed, it doesn't receive the habitat points or the climate preparedness points, but that is something that as the project elements are further fleshed out, our rating team, which is a staff management level team, can have that discussion. However, it will be increasing public access, operational efficiencies. It will have elements of multi-beneficial use. So this is a high pointing project at 105 points out of 135. And then the last project, it has full points. And this is our Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50, south of Bailey Road public access project. This is a project currently advancing with the hope of a 2024 opening. And it receives every point on the criteria. It meets our equity goals, it meets our habitat and resource conservation goals, our partnership goals, our multi-beneficial use. This is a project that is a great example of leveraging it's aligning not only with the Park District's criteria goals, but also with the state advocacy goals. So an example, Assemblymember Tim Grayson did advance $3 million in the state budget for this project. So not only does it align with our goals, it aligned with his goals and the state's goals at a legislative level. So we were pleased to see that. And then just to return to where we are on the timeline today, we're having a discussion with you all. And again, so grateful for your time. With your input and feedback, we will be further refining the policy and bringing it forward to our board in August for formal adoption. And then the goal is to begin applying the policy for next year's budget. And so staff will begin that process come September following formal board adoption. So thank you for your time. I'm going to pull my screen down and see if Deborah Ocker, Christina Kelchner, or Eric Feeler have any additional comments.
Great job, Lisa. I don't have any other comments, but I'm happy to help answer any questions that might come up.
Yeah, same for me. Great job, Lisa. And this is a lot of information to take in. So looking forward to hearing the PAC members' comments for sure. I just wanted to point out that one of the big sort of shifts in thinking here is to have our priorities drive our efforts to get funding rather than the other way around. The park districts have been very successful in securing grant funding and partnership funding, which is great, and we will continue to do that. But we want to be sure that the funding availability is not driving our prioritization of projects as much as our mission and vision is driving that prioritization. So that's something to just kind of keep in mind as you're looking through these criteria and we're having discussion. The other thing I'll mention is that the definition of equity is a little bit different than maybe it's been thought about in the past. And Lisa touched on this, but I just wanted to emphasize it, that equity in the past has been thought of sometimes as geographic equity, so that there's kind of something in every area of the district that's happening, and that approach doesn't really account for historical inequities in terms of investments in communities. And historically, communities that have had the loudest voices, have had the most economic power, have continued to get the most resources. And so by really defining equity to be not equal, sometimes we call it the peanut butter effect. You want to spread the resources evenly across geography, but to really look at the historical inequities of communities and include that in the definition of equity. We think it's where government is going these days in terms of making that distinction between equity versus equality, that everything being equal is not necessarily the same, but true equity looks at historic inequities and tries to address those. So we're excited that this criteria is going to help the district continue to progress in really providing equity for our communities. So I'm looking forward to your comments.
Thank you, Lisa. Wonderful presentation, and really appreciate all your hard work on this, and appreciate the comments from Deborah and Christina. I just wanted to mention from a government affairs standpoint, the point that Christina was making on equity from the lens of addressing areas of need is really where the state government and to some extent the federal government is also going. I know Christina mentioned local government, but from a government affairs perspective, that's really where our opportunities are being more and more created in terms of legislation, in terms of grants. And so from a park district advocacy side of things, it's really important for us to align as much as possible and prioritize as much as possible our advocacy work in both Sacramento and DC and even locally with the projects that are ready through the equity lens, because those are the projects that are in a competitive grant program are get more points basically. And so the more we do on the front end here internally gives Lisa and I a lot of ability to navigate on the other end with our legislative advocacy. So really pleased that you mentioned, Lisa, the Thorogood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50. That's exactly the sweet spot that we're looking for, both from an internal standpoint and project readiness, but also really resonating in Sacramento and led to the $3 million member ask from Assemblymember Grayson. So really appreciate all this work, but it's going to make advocacy easier in the long term, because that's where our state is headed, and it's really important to have this tool in our toolbox. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, I'll echo that. Thanks for that excellent and informative presentation. It seems like it's going to be a really useful framework going forward. And so I'll open it up now to comments and questions from the members. And I see a lineup. So we'll start with Andrew Carey.
Hi, thank you. That was a very good presentation. I applaud your effort. I do have some questions, one of which is we have these large number values, powers or multiples of 5, but I didn't see any partial scores. Is the intention to only use whole number scores? And if so, why do we choose 5 times whatever? That's the first one. And the second one is more important to my mind, which is what is the mechanism to review the score assignments internally? I've been in this environment before, and what I saw happen was that some people are really clever writers and would push the buttons on the high ticket scores criteria and not really necessarily meet those. So what mechanism is there to check this? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Andrew. So firstly, a great eagle eye on the full scoring, and I apologize, I should have touched on that, but I appreciate the question. The reason for the full scoring is when staff was pressure testing this, we found, sort of linked to your second question, is by giving scalable scoring, it really did lead to more subjectivity. And so by having sort of an all or nothing binary score, it had that higher level of objectivity. And so that's the reason that we're recommending an all or nothing scoring approach. And then on what the scoring mechanism is, that is still being fleshed out by management in terms of the procedure for applying the policy. But I will share that staff will not be scoring their own projects. So it won't be that a project manager has that opportunity to be clever. Although we do hope that they are all clever, and they are, and my colleagues, I do respect them. However, it will be a core team providing the scoring rather than on an individual by individual basis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Lisa, if I could just add to that, of course, the board of directors will ultimately retain the final decision-making authority on the prioritization of projects, and that will be fed into the budget, the district's annual budget process.
Great. And Linda, I think I saw next.
Yes, hi. I had a couple questions. This is an excellent presentation. I love data and science and rankings like this. It's really well thought out. And I just had a couple questions. Item 2 on the determination for habitat and preservation. I'm just curious how those rankings are come about. You know, is it by a official biologist? You know, what opportunities do we have to improve or safeguard corridors or flora and fauna? I met with Dee Rosario, my director, recently, and I have to admit I was a little sort of embarrassed, or I didn't really understand, and I'm still trying to understand how these land use, which parks have sort of formal developed areas for conservation for endangered species or threatened species. As most of you know, I retired from the EPA, and this is always high in my level. The other question I had on item 3, because I've recently been in a wheelchair, and I do see a lot of parking lot comments that we get often from the public. I wasn't quite clear if item 3 got into that for access, in addition to, you know, getting campgrounds and new parking lots and new access areas. That one kind of I wondered about with the ADA and the parking lots. And then item 8 kind of confused me a little bit. It almost seems, unless I've got it wrong, that it's sort of an extra points category, because it seemed like the points were already being given if they were getting them in different categories. So then to have like extra points if they multi-benefited confused me just a tad. So that's it. Those are my questions, but a nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for those questions. On the item 2, which is our habitat and wildlife score, this is one that our chief of stewardship will absolutely be a part of. And then also the park district is striving to leverage our quantitative data throughout this process. So we mentioned our work order system for maintenance projects. For this, our stewardship team is currently under the process of developing what's called nature checks, so an inventory of our parks. So there will be just layers of evaluation, and then also, of course, referencing plans and other documents, as you noted, for the cultural and sensitive resources as we're looking at the project site. On item 3 for access, you rightfully point out, we're coming at access from just a number of ways, and this was one of the outcomes of refining this with our colleagues. Access could mean more staff, so more facilities to support more staff at that park site, to expand welcoming our communities and taking care of the cleanliness of the parks, et cetera. So it could be a new staff area, it could be a new parking lot, it could be an expanded trail for supporting more access points. So it really is a broad sweep of how to come about access, and it would include staging areas and parking lots, as well as public transit and other means of both arriving to the park and then enjoying the features within the park. And then on the number 8, thank you for highlighting that. It was the intent of staff to really think about how these pieces come together, including environmental education for visitor centers, and really having that discussion of how the different elements are interwoven. But I think you do highlight something that we should take back to our team and chew on a bit. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'll just add a couple of things, which is, as the PAC is probably aware, the Park District does have an ADA improvement program to comply with ADA requirements. And there's a program to make improvements sort of every year as we're able to. And we're happy to share more information about that with you. So, and that if it's a legal mandate, as our ADA program is, it doesn't necessarily go through the matrix in the same way. That would be one of the essential projects that is a legal requirement to be sure that we're keeping up with the ADA Act.
And Christine, I felt like I had Lisa Gorgian whispering in my ear, all new projects factor in ADA elements. So we didn't have that as a separate score because it should be in every new capital project.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks.
Great. And I think Luana was next.
Yes, so first I wanted to say it was a great presentation and it was very thoughtfully presented. When I first looked at the matrix, the first questions I had was, what does equity mean? What does partnerships mean? What is access? And those were very clearly defined. So I appreciate that. And then I also had questions about the scoring. Thank you for clarifying that binary approach. But also just even, I think, just taking a greater lens of looking who internally kind of is doing scoring and really, is there appropriate department, is there a contract compliance department versus keeping it within engineering? So kind of coming up with that third party. And what I did think was very bold on this was that it listed equity first over habitat and resource conservation. And I didn't know as far as if that was controversial, as far as with the different stakeholders and different conservation groups, but I did think it was a very bold move. And then also as far as moving towards that definition of radius, I know the neighborhood I live in has personally benefited from that definition as far as looking where underserved communities are. And this is with our local park district for the unincorporated areas. So just wanted to highlight that because you've answered a lot of the other questions that I've had. But I think that's a bold move, and that really kind of puts the park district in an area of leadership because you're really looking to highlight those underserved communities with that 1 mile definition. And I think that you need to probably, you'll have to, like, as far as explain a little bit too about as far as how you explained very eloquently here, and Christina, about as far as that doesn't mean, one facility in this area and that area, and why we're moving towards this, and just kind of educating the public on that too. But great job.
I just want to say thank you, Luana, for those comments. We spent a lot of time and worked hard on the equity definition to be sure that we're really getting at historical inequities and the type of equity that you just so eloquently described. So really appreciate your feedback. And this will be an iterative process. We'll probably need to tweak it as we go. So we'll definitely appreciate the PAC's continued engagement as we go forward.
Okay, Igor's next.
Well, thank you. I will echo what everyone else has said. I really appreciate the quality and the accessibility of the presentation. I had a bunch of questions which got answered during that time, so it was an efficient use of time. I do have a couple of maybe fine-tuning kinds of questions. One of them had to do with geographic equity. I noticed that there's a criterion in there, has to do with the radius. I think it is the distance between an underserved community and an access point into the parks. I support that, and I wonder whether it needs to be maybe refined a little bit to also include considerations of actual access. It could be that maybe a underserved community might be a mile or so away from an entrance point to the park, but getting there might involve a really roundabout way to go, or maybe there's obstacles in the way, like a big freeway between where the community is and where the park is. That's some way of getting that to be inequitable kind of a factor as well. I would suggest that maybe take a look at that. There was another factor having to do with essential projects. I presume, and I just don't know, I'd like to have clarification on this, that if something is an essential project, does that necessarily mean that it backs out something else? Because the budget is a finite thing. And so how does that work when something gets named as an essential project? I guess the last thing I'd like to ask some clarification on has to do with a sort of a seniority effect, if you will. Maybe a project has been just barely not making the list for a number of years, but it's a good project and it hasn't been done because it's just kind of been a narrow miss for quite a while. If it's been in existence for quite a bit, does its longevity affect its ability to get in front of a project that maybe is just recently showed up? Or is that even considered to be an important factor? But with that, I will mute myself. Thank you.
I'll take the first stab at that, Lisa, and then you can help. I'll take the last question first. In terms of longevity of projects, first I will say that if we have projects that are actually in motion, that have funding and that have been started on and that are, ongoing projects, those would continue. That we're not going to stop a project, midway. So this is really new projects that we're looking at applying this criteria to. And you're right, Igor, that there are projects that have kind of been talked about for a long time and on the wish list for a long time, but have never had forward motion. The proposal is that is not a criteria that would get points for having a project move ahead. Rather, we would take that project and score it, run it through the criteria and score it in the same way that we would a more recently proposed project, because we really do want to be sure that our, as you say, finite resources are going toward projects that are most closely aligned with the mission and vision. So that is the proposal, and we have a lot of those projects sort of out there in the ether that have been talked about, and we're hoping that that by putting those projects through this criteria and through this exercise, that will help us to make some of those decisions that are hard to make about how to prioritize those projects in accordance with these criteria. So that was a long answer, and so long that I forgot your second question.
Well, I can take his first question, and then I can remind you of his second question, and we'll just keep tag teaming. So your first question was on geographic equity, and as we have it currently defined, it's a half-mile radius. This, I think it was a very long conversation between staff, debating from all different perspectives, because what is the role of regional park? Should it be a 3-mile radius? Should it be that half-mile radius? We're not pocket parks, we're regional parks, and what does that look like? And then we also thought about public transit to parks. But if you identify that it's public transitly accessible, that could be a 3-hour bus ride with 2 transfers. And so it was quite a robust discussion. And the reason that we ended with the half-mile radius to the park was because we felt that that would be walking distance. And you bring up that point of, is it safe walking distance? And I think this is something that we will circle back to our GIS team. They're absolutely fantastic at identifying, yes, this is a 30-meter from this bus stop to this park entrance, but it's dirt on the side of the road. We shouldn't consider that the safest access, and we do need to continue to have that conversation. So thank you for highlighting. And it's because of that rationale that we went with the half-mile for geographic radius. And then for Igor's second question, it was on an essential project and how that would rank in the budget process, and if it would have higher priority than the ranked projects. So I'll let Christina answer that one.
Yeah, this is definitely a tricky one. And first, I will say that for an essential project, for a project to be named essential, that would need to go to the general manager and have the general manager's approval for that. It's not something that's done lightly, and really it would be limited to things, projects that are legally mandated, legally required, or that pose, an immediate health and safety risk. So it is intended to be construed fairly narrowly, but they're projects that we really don't have a choice about, is the intention there. And yes, they would then jump the line ahead of other projects. They wouldn't get scored, but they would just be exempt from the scoring, and because we have to do those projects. That's the intention.
All right, thank you. Roland, you're next.
Well, firstly, I want to say that all the folks that came before me asked a lot of the questions. So thank you for that. I was kind of probably more on the point where Igor was going with a lot of his questions as well. But firstly, I want to say fabulous presentation, really great effort that's been put into this process thus far. And I really appreciate, the Park Advisory Committee being able to be part of this and being able to, give our opinions and that on this. Kind of, following along a little bit with Igor, one of the thoughts that I had was the issue of like, is there risk management involved in the project selection from the consequence of a failure and just the consequence of what, how this might have an adverse effect on the park in general, which again may give it a higher criteria. When I was looking at the criteria, and I did have the same question about the partial ratings, and it seems to me that would lend itself to perhaps 6 and 9. At least within those, are there, because we're talking about efficiencies and things like that, and how do you approve the park or the project that's going to save time, materials, or maintenance. It seems like there's going to be some prioritization within those projects. And then 9 was about maintaining and extending useful life. So I just wonder how maybe that gets sussed out before it gets to this point and they're prioritized in some manner that way. But it does seem like there is some numerical way of evaluating projects based on just I'm an infrastructure guy. So just from an infrastructure perspective, how are projects being ranked and rated? I also echo Igor's sense of I really applaud giving a lot of weight to equity, and just concerned that there may be projects that always will be bumped because they're missing it by, and I don't know what, and that's my next question is, what's the cutoff? Is it just a matter of going down the list until you run out of money? Or does it have to score a minimum of 90 points to be considered? Those kind of thoughts. But I would hate, and I know that's happened to us, where there'll be a project that just never sees the light of day because we've never been able to get it past the criteria. Also, that's been my frustration when trying to get federal dollars for a project as well, and kind of being caught up in that mill of just, it's a good project, but I can't really fit it into the federal box that allows that project to be funded.
Thank you. There was a world of expertise in that question. I really want to express appreciation for it. At this time, staff is not recommending a cutoff, really in the sense of thinking about, will a project be lost in the mix? The ultimate goal of this matrix is to daylight the projects, get the projects on the list, bring awareness to the projects, bring awareness to where they rank on the list, what it looks like, and bring them all into one place that we can all look at and digest and speak through. And then you absolutely highlight criteria number 6 and criteria number 9. So criteria number 6 being operating efficiencies and 9 being maintenance, maintains and extend useful life and services. These were really rooted in our conversation around use it or lose it. The Park District has facilities that need to be maintained, and that was the intention of the scoring. In terms of a partial rating, we'll circle back to the team. And in terms of risk management, I think that's really when we're doing that initial assessment of, is this an essential project or is this a capital project that we have the time to move it through? But with that, I see AGM Ocker's hand, so I'll pass it over to her.
Great, Lisa. Great comments. I just want to, the infrastructure side is really important to us, and our Chief of Maintenance and Skilled Trades, Robert Kennedy, is part of our team, and he is all about that. The district, I think you recall, did a full asset management review of all of our current facilities, and we have facility condition indexes ranked there. So we are using other data to even evaluate where the urgencies are, right? We have a lot of deferred maintenance, and then we also are implementing other data collecting systems for work orders and things like that. So we use all of that data before it even gets to the matrix area. So we're thinking the way you're thinking, Roland.
And I just wanted to add, Roland, excellent observations, and I really appreciate the question. And I just keyed in a little bit on your comment about trying to receive or have a project fit federal criteria. And my brief comment on that really is just that that's really a role that Lisa and I are taking on in terms of making sure that we can figure out how to change the criteria so that we fit it. And I know that we're a little bit unique having a government affairs team here, but really be willing to talk with you offline about ways we can support you in that.
Great, thank you. And now we have Dev. You're still muted, Dev. You're still mute, Dev. You're still muted. Nope, still muted.
Okay,
There you
all right. Thank you. I want to say, as others have, it was a great presentation. A lot of my questions were answered, but you raised one in explaining that survey, and that's the only thing that I'm not sure I heard an answer to, which is equity is important. I'm glad we're emphasizing it, but shouldn't what the public rated, the lighter blue and the darker blue together, when I looked at it, it seemed to me that was 94%. Shouldn't that be in there and at 20%? Because how does the board continue to feel good about representing the public if we don't pick that as a top priority? That's my question. Otherwise, a great presentation. Thank you. I'll mute and listen to the answer.
Thank you. You are correct in highlighting that the equity survey question did not read the highest score in the criteria. However, from doing years of surveys, we know that that could have been how we phrased the question. Was it digestible to the public? And it would probably take maybe 5 rounds of surveys until we really felt comfortable and confident in that response, because you can't have that ongoing dialogue with respondents. However, the reason for the equity scoring, it was really at the direction of our general manager and our board of directors. This criteria is a board policy, it's a board guided policy, a board approved policy. And so for that reason, we took the highest direction from our board, who was able to digest the survey data before guiding their decision on the point scale.
Great, thank you. And I guess I'll take it. I have a few questions that are sort of logistical and process questions mainly, I guess. And so the idea is that this that the projects will all go through the scoring process once a year, because I imagine projects could change in their ability to qualify for different of these criteria each year. So that's the first one. The second one is, will these scores be shared publicly for the projects? I imagine that could, create some interesting dynamics with the public. And so I think there are positives and negatives to that. And then my last question is, how does this interface with the project costs? So I can imagine that you could do lots of $100,000 projects that might be lower scoring for the same cost of $1 million or a couple $1 million project, right? And so is project cost considered separately from these criteria, or it seems like it doesn't quite come into number 6, which is sort of circles around it a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. When will projects go through the matrix? Projects will go through the matrix as part of the budget process. However, this first year, it is the intention to score all the projects, and then on an ongoing basis, if it's a new project introduced, it will receive a score, and if it's recommended and approved to go through, it will receive a score. But that is something we're continuing to flesh out with the procedure, but it's not necessarily the intention to rescore a project if nothing changed from the former year. However, we are going to continue to have that discussion with our general manager. This scoring is intended to be a part of our budget book, which is a public-facing document. And then project cost. The goal here in terms of creating a funding strategy and driving a project forward, that's often seeded, whether it be through funding from our general fund or funding from our bond program, such as Measure WW. And then it's on our fundraising staff team, so our grants team and our government affairs team, to work with those projects and work with state agencies and state partners and federal agencies and federal partners to identify grant programs. And so it can really be that recommendation from the project score to prioritize these projects for the advocacy and grant efforts. Because we do have, typically we have numerous projects that might meet that grant, and then the question is which one is the one that we apply for to move it forward. And it could be we apply for a handful and see what works out. But in terms of the project cost, it's not embedded in this criteria. We felt like that might be a little bit burdensome, and we want to keep it separate through our budget process. However, it is complementary to this criteria, and that was the intention. As Eric's noted a number of times when it was being crafted, we also thought about how does this align with state, federal, and local goals in order to align with grant programs, align with partners.
Great, thank you. And I see Andrew's hand up. Is that from before still, from your first question? Okay. Great, so we covered a lot of ground. Are there any other questions from PAC members? Great, and so since this is an informational item, I think we can just go ahead and move forward. But again, thank you so much for all your effort on this and for this really clear and informative presentation. That was really enjoyable.
And thank you, Chair Satsui. And I just I noticed that Member Claxton's hand is up. I don't know if she had a question about this. Oh, thank you. Oh, there was a clapping. Great. I just really wanted to thank you. It's such a joy to bring items to the PAC. It's a wonderful group. Your questions are all just so informed, and you have such expertise. So we appreciate your thoughtfulness and helping us to make this policy better and stronger. So I just really wanted to appreciate being able to bring this to you.
Great, thank you. And I see Roland's hand again. Did you have one last follow-up, Roland?
Yeah, I kind of did. And, I think, I know it's just an informational item, but it seems like it's in a sequence of where it's coming through and then headed back to the board. And, you know, like I said, I think it seems as though generally the PAC is in support of the effort and the direction that it's going in. And I don't know if that comment can be transmitted to the board as an outcome from the meeting, if that's indeed what the PAC thinks.
I'll address that, Roland. I think, you know, all that we've all been taking notes, and it'll all be articulated to the board prior to their consideration. But I do think there might be a way for, if the chair agrees, for the PAC in this forum to issue a supporting concept recommendation, because I know staff is not asking for a full recommendation at this point, but sometimes when we consider legislation, we are able to have a supporting concept position. So if that would help articulate what I think you're suggesting, Roland, I think staff would be open to that from the body.
Okay, yeah, so I'll entertain motions and seconds for the PAC to take a vote on expressing our support for this concept.
I would so move.
I will second.
Okay, so moved by Igor and I think seconded by Andrew. Is that
That's
right?
correct.
And so is there any further discussion?
Neil, I would just mention that this is scheduled to go to the board on August 9th, just for the PAC's awareness.
Okay. Okay, so Madam Secretary, could you call the roll, please?
Absolutely, Chair. Member Arce, not present. Member Burke, not present. Member Carey.
That's an aye.
Thank you, Member Carey. Aye. Member Chang. Member Chang, no. Member Chang. No response, but Member Chang is present. Member Claxton.
Aye.
Claxton, aye. Thank you. Member Corkin.
Aye.
Member Corkin, aye. Member Deschambeau.
I am going to abstain. I still have concerns of this going forward with a generic approval and concept, and yet our minutes are not going forward, so they receive our comments.
Member Deschambeau abstain. Member Dieter.
I abstain.
Member Dieter abstain. Member Espana.
Aye.
Member Espana, aye. Member Lacy. Member Lacy not present. Member Mahadevan.
Aye.
Mahadevan, aye. Member Nason.
I will abstain.
I have Member Nason abstain. Thank you. Member Rickard.
Aye.
Rickard, aye. Member Robinson. Not present. Member Sen Wong.
Yes.
Sen Wong, aye. Member Simmons not present. Member Skaradoff.
Aye.
Skaradoff, aye. Member Williams.
Aye.
Williams, aye. Member Obringer not present. Chair Tsutsui.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Motion does not pass unless Member Chang is able to vote.
Flora, let's get advice from our legal counsel on that, because the committee currently has one vacancy, so 20 members consist of the full quorum.
I also
I
think.
see Member Nathan.
Present. Mike,
I'm
it's a legal
going
question.
to change my vote. My abstention was symbolic to, in agreement with Member Deschambeau's comments. But if it is needed to pass, I'm willing to change my vote to yes.
Okay, I have Member Nason as aye. with the added comments, including what Chief of Legislative and Government Affairs Eric Feeler mentioned. We will confer with legal counsel. There are 11 aye votes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for that. So we can move on to item number 4, report from the chair. I have no report. Item number 5, staff comments. Are there any additional comments from staff?
Just want to appreciate everybody taking time for the special meeting and the number of folks that actually participated. Really value that, and the feedback was excellent. So really appreciate it.
Great, thank you. And if there are no other comments from members of the Park Advisory Committee, then I will adjourn this meeting on July 28th at 11:23 a.m. The next meeting of the PAC is tentatively scheduled for the regular time, which is 4 p.m. on the 4th Monday of August. That's August 22nd. So